Welcome back to Global Lens. How will Trump's tariffs impact India and other emerging economies? Joining me now to discuss this further is Willem, Buiter, independent economic advisor and former chief economist of Citigroup as well. Willem, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you what Donald Trump has said about India. He has said that India has very high tariffs. They charge us very high tariffs. We don't do much business with them. And I'm going to impose substantially high tariffs on India in the next 24 hours. Do you think this kind of treatment for India is justified? And is this based on any sound assessment?
It is true, I think, that India is a high tariff country. The US is imposing, I think, inappropriately, but higher tariffs on countries that A, have high tariffs or non-tariff barriers to trade with the US, and also countries that run trade surpluses for goods. He doesn't look at services, which should be the other way around when it comes to India. So the second, of course, driver of the threat of high tariffs, higher than 25%, that is already sort of effectively on the table, is an unspecified penalty for India trading on a significant scale with Russia, purchasing fossil fuels and arms. So these are the two motivating forces. I do think that the economics of it makes no sense. I think both the US and India should have low or no tariffs with each other, but it is true historically that India had higher tariffs on imports from the US than the US imposed on Indian goods and services.
Right. When it comes to energy imports from Russia, in 2022, when the war broke out, India had started importing oil from Russia in big quantities because other supplies were being diverted to Europe. At that time, the US administration had also not imposed sanctions on India. In fact, certain US officials had expressed that they were fine with India importing Russian oil as long as it's abiding by the price cap, because they felt it's necessary to maintaining stability in crude oil prices in the global economy. Do you think Donald Trump can go against that policy? Because whatever India had done at that point in time was in line with what the US government was saying and what EU was saying.
Well, in 22, I think that the US and Europe both significantly began to reduce their imports of oil and fossil fuels from Russia. It is true that some officials, I don't think this is true at the highest level in the US, were not upset by the fact that India was processing Russian crude oil so as to because it maintained equilibrium in the market. But it would have been very easy to maintain equilibrium in global markets without India increasing its imports from Russia, simply by Saudi Arabia, other Gulf states increasing their production, which we were perfectly capable of doing. At the moment, of course, the US and Europe have very much reduced their imports of goods, especially oil and gas, from Russia, and they are imposing and plan to impose even higher tariffs and sanctions on Russia, and that includes now also the secondary tariffs for countries like India who purchase significant amounts of Russian oil. The two main countries supporting Russia's oil efforts through purchases of oil and gas are China and India. And so this does create a serious problem for the US and for Europe.
All right. I would also like to ask you, is Donald Trump and the US going to gain out of these tariffs that will now come into effect from the 7th of August? Will Trump and the US, will they be winners?
No, there are no winners in tariff games. The effective tariff, average tariff on imports into the US will go up from 2.3%, which is very low, before Trump, to 17.3% on August 7, if everything is implemented as planned. And it could go higher. This tariff will partly be paid, of course, by the countries exporting to the US, partly by the corporations importing into the US, and partly by American consumers and American businesses that use imported inputs for domestic production and even for exports. So now this is a fiscal contraction. Tariffs are taxes, which also impedes world trade. So it is a negative for the world and also for the US. It's not a major negative globally yet, because very few countries have retaliated. Most countries that the US has negotiated with, even though it imposed higher tariffs on them, have reduced the tariffs on the US. Major exception, Russia, China, and to some extent also Canada. So we have seen a lowering of some tariffs in response to the US threatening even higher tariffs. But on balance, this is not good world news.
Do you also feel that Donald Trump is being unfair with India? US and India have been traditional allies. This was called the Partnership of the Future. The two greatest democracies of the world coming together, working for a shared future. And now everything seems to scatter away. He is threatening India, but not threatening China, which also has very close relations with Russia. In fact, probably Russia and China are #1 partners for each other. Why do you think this is happening?
I do think that the 25% tariff and the threat of more is really not justified. Now, if Europe, the EU, can get away with 15%, the UK with 10%, Japan is 50%, why would India pay 25%? The only possible justification is that India is also a high tariff country. But that should have led to negotiations for India to lower its tariffs without getting 25 and then possible secondary sanctions imposed on it. The secondary sanctions are really separate from trade sanctions per se. They are an attempt to damage the Russian economy by depriving it of its key sources of revenue through exports. And so that, I'm afraid, is unlikely to go away until Mr. Putin decides that the war in Ukraine has lasted long enough.
All right. Thank you very much, Willem Buiter, for joining us on the program.